Sarah Matthews had been appraising antique photographs for 15 years, but the wedding portrait brought to her Chicago studio on a gray October morning stopped her cold. The elderly woman who carried it, Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, clutched it like a precious relic as she placed it carefully on Sarah's examination table. "This belonged to my great-grandmother," Eleanor explained, her voice trembling slightly. "I found it in the attic after settling her estate. The family always whispered about this photo, but no one ever told me why." Sarah studied the sepia-toned image through her magnifying glass. At first glance, it appeared to be a typical 1912 wedding photograph. A radiant bride in an elaborate lace gown standing beside her groom in a formal black suit. The bride's expression was pure joy, her eyes sparkling even through the faded tones of the century-old print. Behind them stood what appeared to be wedding guests and family members, all dressed in their finest period attire. The photograph had been taken in what looked like a grand parlor, with ornate wallpaper and heavy drapery visible in the background. Everything seemed perfectly normal for an upper-class American wedding of the era. The composition was professional, suggesting it had been taken by an established photographer, not an amateur. But as Sarah adjusted her magnification and focused on the groom's face, her breath caught in her throat. While everyone else in the photograph beamed with wedding day happiness, the groom's smile was different. It wasn't the nervous joy of a new husband or the satisfied expression of a man beginning his married life. Instead, his smile held something else entirely. Something that made Sarah's experienced eye pause with unease. "Mrs. Whitfield," Sarah said slowly, not looking up from the photograph, "what exactly did your family whisper about this picture?" Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "They said there was something wrong with it. Something that shouldn't be there." Sarah spent the next hour examining every detail of the photograph with professional precision. She noted the photographer's mark in the lower right corner. J. Morrison Studios, Boston, Massachusetts. The paper stock and chemical processing were consistent with 1912 photography techniques. Everything about the image screamed authenticity, except for that unsettling smile. Under higher magnification, the groom's expression became even more disturbing. While his mouth curved upward in what should have been wedding day joy, his eyes held a coldness that seemed to pierce through the decades. More troubling still, Sarah noticed something clutched in his left hand, partially hidden by the formal pose, but clearly visible to her trained eye. "Have you researched your family's history around this time period?" Sarah asked Eleanor, who had been watching her work with growing anxiety. "Some," Eleanor replied. "The bride was my great-grandmother, Catherine Morrison. She married Thomas Ashford in Boston in September 1912. They were both from prominent families. She was the daughter of a successful merchant, and he came from old New England money." Sarah made careful notes as Eleanor spoke. "What happened to them after the wedding?" Eleanor's face clouded. "That's where the family stories get strange. According to the records I found, Thomas died just 3 months after their wedding. Some kind of accident. But Catherine never remarried, never spoke of him again. She moved away from Boston and started her life over completely." This information sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She looked again at the object in Thomas's hand, now certain it wasn't a typical wedding accessory. The shape was wrong, too angular and deliberate. She adjusted her equipment to get the clearest possible view. "Mrs. Whitfield, I think we need to dig deeper into this photograph. Would you be willing to let me do some research? I have contacts at historical societies and photography archives who might be able to help us understand what we're looking at." Eleanor nodded eagerly. "Please, I've carried this mystery my whole life. My family always acted like there was some terrible secret connected to this photo, but no one would ever tell me what it was." 2 days later, Sarah found herself on a train to Boston, the photograph carefully secured in her research portfolio. Her first stop was the Boston Historical Society, where she hoped to find records of the Morrison and Ashford families from 1912. The archive librarian, Dr. James Kellerton, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who had spent his career studying Boston's social history. When Sarah showed him the photograph, his reaction was immediate and startling. "Dear God," he whispered, leaning closer to examine the image. "I've heard about this photograph, but I never thought I'd actually see it." Sarah's pulse quickened. "You know about this picture?" Dr. Kellerton nodded grimly. The Ashford family tried to destroy all copies after Thomas's death. They claimed it was cursed, that something evil had been captured in the image. Most people assumed it was just grief and superstition, but some of the older archivists have whispered about it for decades. He led Sarah to a private research room and pulled out several thick volumes of Boston Society records from 1912. The Ashfords were one of Boston's most prominent families, he explained as he flipped through pages of genealogical information. Old money, established in shipping and banking. Thomas was their only son, heir to a considerable fortune. Sarah studied the family records while Dr. Kellerton continued his explanation. The Morrison family was newer money. Catherine's father had built a successful import business. The marriage between Catherine and Thomas was seen as a perfect union of established society and entrepreneurial success. But something went wrong, Sarah prompted. Dr. Kellerton's expression darkened. Very wrong. Thomas died in December 1912, just as you mentioned. But the circumstances were unusual. The official record lists it as an accidental fall down the stairs of the family mansion. However, there were rumors at the time that suggested something far more sinister. He pulled out a newspaper clipping from December 15, 1912. The headline read, "Young Ashford. Heir dies in tragic accident." But as Sarah read the article, she noticed subtle inconsistencies in the witness accounts and unexplained details about the scene of Thomas's death. Dr. Kellerton, in your professional opinion, what do you think really happened to Thomas Ashford? Dr. Kellerton leaned back in his chair, clearly wrestling with how much to reveal. Sarah, what I'm about to show you has been kept in our restricted archives for over a century. The Ashford family donated these materials with the stipulation that they remained sealed until all immediate family members had passed away. He disappeared into the archives and returned with a dusty box marked Ashford Estate. Restricted access. Inside were police reports, personal correspondence, and most shocking of all, additional photographs from the wedding day. The Boston police conducted a more thorough investigation than the newspapers reported, Dr. Kellerton explained as he carefully laid out the documents. They suspected Thomas's death wasn't accidental, but they could never prove it. The family's influence was considerable and the investigation was quietly closed. Sarah examined the police photographs with growing alarm. They showed the scene of Thomas's death, the grand staircase of the Ashford mansion, with chalk outlines and evidence markers. But more disturbing were the witness statements from the household staff. Look at this. Dr. Kellerton pointed to a statement from the family's butler. He describes Thomas's behavior in the weeks before his death as increasingly erratic and frightening. The cook mentioned that Thomas had been seen talking to himself and laughing inappropriately at odd hours. Sarah felt pieces of a dark puzzle beginning to form. She turned back to the wedding photograph, studying Thomas's smile with new understanding. Dr. Kellerton, was there any mention of mental illness in the Ashford family history? Not officially, but he hesitated, then pulled out a leather-bound journal. This belonged to Catherine Morrison Ashford. She left it to the Historical Society in her will, with instructions that it be opened 50 years after her death. That was 25 years ago. The journal's pages were yellowed and fragile, but Catherine's handwriting remained clear and precise. Sarah began reading the entries from late 1912, just after the wedding, and her blood ran cold. September 30th, 1912. Thomas's behavior has changed dramatically since our wedding day. The man I married seems to have disappeared, replaced by someone I no longer recognize. His smile terrifies me. It's the same expression he wore in our wedding photograph, and I fear I know what it means. October 15th, 1912. I found the letters hidden in Thomas's study. God forgive me, I know the truth about my husband, and I fear for my life. With trembling hands, Dr. Kellerton produced a small bundle of letters from the bottom of the archive box. These are what Catherine mentioned in her journal. They were found hidden in Thomas's personal effects after his death. Sarah carefully unfolded the first letter, dated September 1912, just weeks before the wedding. The handwriting was different from Thomas's other documents, more erratic, with an unsettling intensity to the pen strokes. My dearest Catherine, you looked so beautiful today during our engagement portrait session. I can hardly wait to make you mine forever. You have no idea what I am capable of, what I have already done to ensure our happiness. The Morrison girl who rejected me last spring learned not to cross Thomas Ashford. They never did find her body in the harbor, Sarah's hands shook as she read. Dr. Kellerton watched her reaction with grim understanding. "There's more," he said quietly. The second letter was even more disturbing, revealing Thomas's detailed plans for their wedding night and beyond. It became clear that he viewed marriage not as a partnership but as ownership. The letter contained explicit threats about what would happen if Catherine ever tried to leave him. But it was the third letter that made Sarah understand the true horror captured in that wedding photograph. Written the morning of the wedding, it read, "Today I marry my prize. I wore my special smile for the photographer, the same smile I gave to Mary Harrison before she took her final swim, the same smile I gave to the Mitchell boy before his tragic riding accident. Catherine will learn to obey, or she will learn what that smile really means." The photographer captured my moment of triumph perfectly. Dr. Kellerton pulled out additional police files. After Thomas's death, investigators found evidence linking him to 3 unsolved deaths in the Boston area between 1910 and 1912. Mary Harrison, the Morrison girl mentioned in the letter, was found drowned in Boston Harbor in April 1912. Jonathan Mitchell, a young man who had supposedly courted Catherine before Thomas, died in a riding accident that witnesses described as suspicious. Sarah stared at the wedding photograph with new eyes. Thomas's smile wasn't one of joy or nervousness. It was the smile of a predator who believed he had successfully trapped his prey. The object in his hand, now that she knew what to look for, appeared to be a small knife concealed within his wedding bouquet. "Dr. Kellerton, how did Catherine survive? How did she escape?" The librarian's expression grew even more serious. "That, my dear, is where this story takes its most remarkable turn." Dr. Kellerton opened Catherine's journal to entries from November 1912, just weeks before Thomas's death. Sarah read with fascination as the story of a terrified young bride transformed into something far more complex. November 8, 1912. "I have been searching through Thomas's belongings while he is at his club. The letters I found are evidence of unspeakable crimes. I now understand that I married a monster who has killed at least 3 people. But I also understand that I may be the only person who can stop him. November 15, 1912. I have contacted Detective Morrison, no relation despite the name, privately. He confirmed my worst fears. Thomas is suspected in several deaths, but there has never been enough evidence. I have decided what I must do. Thomas believes he holds all the power in our marriage, but he has underestimated the daughter of a Boston merchant." November 22, 1912. Thomas's behavior grows more erratic daily. Last night he showed me his collection, souvenirs taken from his victims. He is planning something terrible for me, I am certain. But I have been planning as well. The detective has agreed to help, and we have devised a plan. Sarah looked up from the journal. "Catherine was working with the police?" Dr. Kellerton nodded. Detective Patrick Morrison was one of Boston's most respected investigators. He had been tracking the suspicious deaths for months, but could never gather enough evidence against Thomas. When Catherine contacted him, he saw an opportunity to finally get justice. The next journal entry revealed the details of their plan. November 30, 1912. Tomorrow evening, Thomas has arranged what he calls a special dinner for us. Based on his behavior and the things he has said, I believe he intends to kill me that night. Detective Morrison will be positioned outside the house. We have arranged signals. If Thomas attempts to harm me, I will light the lamp in the front window, and the detective will enter with backup officers. December 1st, 1912. It is done. Thomas revealed his true nature tonight, just as we predicted. He showed me the knife he intended to use, the same one he carried hidden in our wedding bouquet. But when he moved to attack me, I was ready. The struggle was brief. He fell down the stairs, but it was no accident. I pushed him to save my own life and the lives of any future victims. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. She killed him in self-defense. More than that, Dr. Kellerton replied. She saved countless other lives. The police investigation found evidence that Thomas was planning to murder several other young women in Boston society. Catherine's actions stopped a serial killer. Dr. Kellerton turned to the final section of police documents, revealing the complex web of decisions made after Thomas's death. Detective Morrison faced a difficult choice. Catherine had clearly acted in self-defense, but proving Thomas's crimes posthumously would have been nearly impossible in 1912. The Ashford family's power and influence, made a public trial unthinkable. Sarah studied the police reports carefully. So they covered it up? They protected Catherine while ensuring justice was served, Dr. Kellerton corrected. Detective Morrison and his superiors decided that the evidence of Thomas's crimes would be sealed in police archives, but the official cause of death would remain accidental. This way, Catherine could start a new life without the scandal of a murder trial, while the truth about Thomas's crimes was preserved for history. The files revealed extensive documentation of Thomas's criminal activities. Police had found a hidden room in the Ashford mansion containing personal items stolen from his victims, detailed plans for future murders, and a journal describing his crimes in horrifying detail. The most chilling discovery, Dr. Kellerton continued, was Thomas's confession that he had been planning Catherine's murder since before their engagement. He viewed the entire courtship and marriage as an elaborate game, with her death as the ultimate prize. Sarah returned to the wedding photograph, now understanding the full context of that predatory smile. So when this picture was taken, Thomas was already planning to kill his bride? According to his journal, yes. He wrote extensively about how much he enjoyed the irony of smiling for their wedding photographer while holding the weapon he intended to use to murder Catherine on their honeymoon. Dr. Kellerton pulled out one final document, a letter from Catherine to Detective Morrison. Written years later, Catherine stayed in contact with Detective Morrison for the rest of her life. She eventually moved to California and remarried, but she never forgot the debt she owed to the detective who helped her escape. The letter, dated 1925, read in part, "Detective Morrison, I write to thank you once again for giving me the chance at a new life. Not a day passes that I don't think about that terrible night in December 1912, but I also remember that we prevented a monster from claiming more innocent lives. The photograph from my wedding day serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most innocent facades, but it also reminds me that courage and justice can triumph over even the darkest intentions." Dr. Kellerton had saved one final revelation for Sarah. From the archive box, he produced a sealed envelope marked J. Morrison Studios, personal account. The photographer who took the wedding portrait left this account with his business records. It was discovered when his studio was sold in 1945. He had apparently been haunted by that wedding session for the rest of his life. Sarah opened the envelope carefully, revealing a handwritten account by photographer Jonathan Morrison, no relation to Detective Morrison or the bride. Dated 1913, it described his experience photographing the Ashford wedding. "I have been a wedding photographer for over 20 years, and I have never experienced anything like the Ashford wedding session. While arranging the formal portraits, I noticed the groom's behavior was extremely unusual. He insisted on holding a small object during the photographs, claiming it was a family heirloom, but he concealed it so carefully that I began to suspect something was wrong. Most disturbing was his smile. In all my years of photographing weddings, I have learned to recognize genuine joy, nervous happiness, and even forced politeness. But Mr. Ashford's smile was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was predatory, almost sinister. I felt compelled to capture it clearly, though I could not explain why at the time. When I developed the photographs, the image of his smile disturbed me so greatly that I almost destroyed the prints. Something in his expression seemed to threaten not just his bride, but anyone who looked upon the photograph. I later learned of his death and the rumors surrounding it, and I understood why his smile had filled me with such dread." The photographer's account continued with technical details about the session that Sarah found fascinating. He described how Thomas had specifically requested that the formal portrait capture him, holding his lucky charm, and how he had positioned himself to ensure the object remained partially hidden but visible to careful observation. Most remarkable was the photographer's final observation. "In my professional opinion, Mr. Ashford posed for that wedding portrait knowing it would be his last photograph. He smiled for the camera as if he were already savoring a victory that had not yet occurred. When I learned the truth about his character after his death, I realized I had captured the face of evil itself." Dr. Kellerton looked at Sarah gravely. "The photographer's account confirms what we learned from the other evidence. Thomas Ashford used his wedding day as the setup for what he believed would be the perfect murder." As Sarah prepared to leave Boston, Dr. Kellerton provided her with one final piece of the puzzle, a folder marked Morrison Investigation, Final Report, 1913. Detective Morrison submitted this report to his superiors 1 year after Thomas's death, he explained. It was classified for decades, but it provides the complete picture of what really happened. The report revealed that Detective Morrison's investigation had uncovered evidence linking Thomas to 7 suspicious deaths between 1910 and 1912, far more than the 3 mentioned in the initial documents. The detective had been building a case against Thomas for months before. Catherine contacted him. Subject Thomas Ashford demonstrated a pattern of targeting young women and men from prominent Boston families, the report stated. His method involved elaborate courtship or friendship, followed by carefully planned murders designed to appear accidental. Physical evidence found in his private study included detailed plans for the murder of Catherine Morrison Ashford, scheduled for December 3, 1912. The report described the night of Thomas's death in clinical detail. Catherine had indeed lighted the lamp signal, and Detective Morrison had entered the house with backup officers just as Thomas attacked his wife with the knife he had carried in their wedding bouquet. In the struggle that followed, Catherine had pushed Thomas down the stairs, resulting in his death. The investigating officers determined that Mrs. Ashford acted in clear self-defense against a man who had already committed multiple murders and was in the process of attempting another, the report concluded. Given the social circumstances of 1912 and the power of the Ashford family, a decision was made to classify the death as accidental while preserving all evidence of the subject's crimes for historical record. Sarah was struck by the detective's final observation. The wedding photograph taken by J. Morrison Studios serves as the most chilling evidence of the subject's criminal mindset. Analysis of his expression and posture confirms that he posed for this portrait while actively planning his bride's murder. This image stands as a testament to the evil that can hide behind society's most sacred ceremonies. Dr. Kellerton closed the file. Detective Morrison died in 1945, but his son donated his father's personal papers to our archives in 1970. Among them was a letter addressed to whoever discovers this case in the future. The letter, written in Detective Morrison's careful handwriting, provided a final perspective on the case. Catherine Ashford was one of the bravest women I ever encountered. She risked her life to stop a killer and save others. The photograph that started this investigation captures a moment of evil, but Catherine's courage transformed it into evidence of justice served. I hope that someday, when enough time has passed, her true heroism can be recognized. Sarah returned to Chicago with a complete understanding of the wedding photograph's dark secret. When she met with Eleanor Whitfield to share her findings, she carefully explained the full story, from Thomas's crimes to Catherine's heroic actions. Your great-grandmother wasn't just a survivor, Sarah told Eleanor gently. She was a hero who saved countless lives by stopping a serial killer. That photograph, as disturbing as it is, represents the moment she unknowingly posed with a monster, but also the beginning of her journey toward justice. Eleanor wept as she listened to the complete story. All these years, my family whispered about shame and scandal, but Catherine was brave, not shameful. Sarah had prepared a complete dossier of her research for Eleanor, including copies of all the historical documents and Detective Morrison's final report. The Boston Historical Society is planning a small exhibition about unsolved crimes of the early 1900s. They'd like to include Catherine's story with your permission. It would honor her memory and educate people about domestic violence and serial crimes in that era. Eleanor agreed immediately. Catherine deserves to be remembered for her courage, not hidden away like a family secret. As they examined the photograph one final time together, Sarah pointed out details she had learned to recognize. The knife hidden in Thomas's bouquet, his predatory smile, even his posture. Everything about this image speaks to his criminal intentions. But knowing Catherine's story, we can also see her strength. Look at her eyes. There's determination there, even if she didn't yet know what she would need to do. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. It's amazing how a single photograph can hold so much history. Sarah smiled. That's what I love about my work. Every image tells a story, but some stories are more important than others. Your great-grandmother's courage saved lives and brought justice. That wedding portrait may have captured a moment of evil, but it ultimately became evidence of good triumphing over darkness. 6 months later, Eleanor attended the opening of the Boston Historical Society's exhibition, Hidden Crimes, Forgotten Heroes, Justice in Early 20th Century Boston. Catherine Morrison. Ashford's story was featured prominently, with the wedding photograph displayed alongside Detective Morrison's case files and Catherine's journal entries. The exhibition description read, "This 1912 wedding portrait appears to show a joyful celebration, but careful examination reveals a darker truth. The groom's smile conceals the mind of a serial killer, while the bride's courage would ultimately bring justice and save innocent lives. This photograph serves as a reminder that evil can hide behind the most innocent facades, but also that ordinary people can find extraordinary strength when facing unimaginable evil." Eleanor stood before the display, finally understanding why her family had whispered about the photograph for generations. It wasn't shame that had made them uncomfortable. It was the unconscious recognition of evil captured in that predatory smile. But now, Catherine's true story could be told, transforming a family's hidden burden into a legacy of courage and justice.